Hi, everybody, and welcome back. We are going to talk today, we're going to continue about water. We talked about water earlier, and we stopped here with this slide where we learned that water has a shape, right? You can kind of see the shape there, and it also has charges. So we learned that water has a negative side and a positive side. All right. Now, if you understand about water, you should be able to answer this question without looking and draw the correct shape of a water molecule. That is something you should be able to do. And you should be able to label which end is positive and which end is negative. Okay, so if you were to answer this question, you would see that there is an oxygen connected to two hydrogens, almost like a Mickey Mouse shape. The oxygen is negative because that's where the electrons spend the most time, and the two hydrogens both are positive. All right, so those are two things you should be able to do. Now, water is polar. That's why it has the positive end and the negative end. And that means that water can form a hydrogen bond. So what is a hydrogen bond? You may want to write this down. It's not written here, but I would write a hydrogen bond is an attraction between the oxygen of one water molecule and the hydrogen of a different water molecule. So a hydrogen bond is between two different molecules. All right, so it's not within, it's between. So here we have a bunch of waters. I'm going to look at this water that I'm circling. That water, the oxygen is negative, the hydrogens are positive. So the oxygen of one molecule is going to form an attraction between the hydrogen of another molecule. All right, now that's pretty important because what that means is that these two water molecules will want to stick to one another, stick together. So it's not the strongest interaction in the world, but it is strong enough to keep them together. A hydrogen bond is kind of like as sticky as a Post-it note, all right? A Post-it note is not all that sticky, but it will stay in place. So here we have a hydrogen bond. It is not so strong that it can't be broken, but it is strong enough to keep it in place. So that is a hydrogen bond. Water molecules are attracted to one another through this hydrogen bonding. So how do hydrogen bonds affect water? Well, it causes a few different properties. One is cohesion. That's a term to know. I'm underlining it. Cohesion is when water molecules like to stick to one another. They like to stick together like we just saw. Adhesion is when water molecules like to stick to other surfaces that are polar. So to other polar things. Water is not going to stick to stuff that's non-polar, oil, fat, those things water doesn't stick to very well. So cohesion, I like to think of cooperating. The water is together, holding hands, it's stuck together. Adhesion, like an adhesive, water is sticking to other things. A term capillarity. So capillarity is something that's going to use both cohesion and adhesion to defy gravity. So what does that mean? You're actually going to be doing this in our lab. You'll have a capillary tube, which is a very thin tube that is open on both ends. And when you stick the tube in water, water is going to stick to itself. What is that called? That's cohesion. And it's going to stick to the sides of the tube because the tube is so narrow, gravity is not going to push the water down. So here's our capillary tube. Gravity is pushing down, but the water is stuck to the sides of the tube. So it's not going to be pushed out. So capillarity uses both cohesion and adhesion to go against gravity. This is also the same way that plants can draw water up from the ground all the way to the very top. Trees are filled with very tiny tubes called xylem, and the xylem draws the water up. and the water sticks to the sides of the xylem, and that is stronger than the force of gravity trying to push the water down. So cohesion is the tendency of water to stick to other water molecules through hydrogen bonding. Here's our picture. The water molecules are holding hands because those hand holding part that represents the hydrogen bonding. So here we have a hydrogen bond, a hydrogen bond, a hydrogen bond, a hydrogen bond. Notice the hydrogen bond is between water molecules. It is not within a water molecule. Within would be this. That is a covalent bond. That's very strong. That is like cement holding the water together. Between water molecules, that is an H bond. That is not quite as strong. It's like a Post-it note. It can be broken. So again, the hydrogen bond is between the hydrogen of one water and the oxygen of another water, keeping water together. Adhesion is the tendency of water to stick to other surfaces. So you see here, these pine leaves, water is sticking to them, and it's sticking to them because the pine leaves are polar, the water is polar, so the polar water likes to stick to the surface. You may have noticed something like this before, where you pour water from a glass and it dribbles down the side. That's because the water likes to stick to the glass. It doesn't like to let go. So that's adhesion. So adhesion, water, or cohesion, water sticking to other water. Adhesion, water sticking to other things. Okay, now adhesion and cohesion are going to cause a number of different properties. One of these properties is surface tension. Surface tension is when water forms a layer that holds together as a drop. And this is caused by cohesion. Surface tension is caused by cohesion. So here's a drop of water. Now this drop of water is being held together because those water molecules are holding on to one another through cohesion. They don't like to let go. So all these water molecules here, those water molecules are sticking together, holding the drop together. In a similar way, water molecules are holding on to one another in this beaker, and the strength of the water holding on to one another is actually holding the paper clip up. Gravity is forcing the paper clip down, but those water molecules have these hydrogen bonds between them, and those hydrogen bonds are not allowing the paper clip through. All right. We also have temperature regulation. Hydrogen bonds don't break very easily. They don't want to break, and breaking the hydrogen bonds is required in order for water to heat up, and therefore water does not heat up very quickly. Water heats up slowly, right? A watched pot never boils. It takes a long time for water to boil because the heat has to break those hydrogen bonds first. Water has to absorb a lot of heat before the temperature would change, and this is another property caused by cohesion. Temperatures don't change very often. And this is a good thing, right? This means that lakes stay liquid even though it's very cold. The top might freeze over, but most of the lake is liquid because it doesn't like to change temperature. This also means that water remains cool even when it's very hot out. So it keeps the temperature of a lake or a river pretty constant throughout the year, and that helps the things that survive in the lake. Right? If the lake got very cold or very hot, the fish and the plants in the lake would not survive. All right, when water freezes and becomes ice, it expands, it gets bigger. So what does this mean? If it gets bigger, its density goes down and therefore ice will float. Very unusual. Most things, when they solidify, they become more dense and they sink, but not ice. Ice is less dense and it floats. This is a really big deal, especially because of lakes. This means that when water freezes in a lake, it stays at the top, and it kind of acts like a little insulator, keeping the rest of the lake liquid, allowing fish to survive even in the winter. Fish and plants. So ice floats, right? If you put ice into your water, the ice should float at the top. It does not sink to the bottom. If it sinks to the bottom, there is something wrong with your water or your ice. So ice is always going to float. This is good. This keeps lakes and streams and oceans livable even when it's very cold. All right. This is also a universal solvent. This means that many, many things are going to dissolve in water. Solute is the stuff that is dissolved. So salt, sugar, usually it's like a powder. Solvent is the thing doing the dissolving. In this case, that is water. Right? Concentrated solutions have more solute per solvent. So think about this as like if you're making Kool-Aid and you add a ton of sugar, very sugary Kool-Aid, it is going to have a high molarity. Sometimes things are diluted. Diluted means there's way more water and way less salt or sugar, and that is a very low molarity, so 0.1 or 0.5. So water can form solutions very easily. That's another important property. Here we have a picture of water dissolving salt. This is a big chunk of salt, maybe a granule of salt, and the water is dissolving it piece by piece. Slowly, water can dissolve salt. And finally, water can be acidic or basic. We're not going to get into this too much, but basically, living things generally like to be neutral. So right around 7, you exist in a neutral state. Your cells are neutral. We can go from 1 to 14. The higher numbers are basic. The lower numbers are acidic, and 7 is neutral. Living things usually have a preferred pH. Most living things like to be around a 7. So if we get too acidic or basic, that's a problem. And we can measure the pH with a number of different things that you may remember from chemistry. We won't get into that too much right now. All right, so those are your properties of water. We are going to explore these in lab later. Let me know if you have any questions.